In 1822, this man from Grenoble, France, goes down in history by unraveling the great mystery of hieroglyphics. He succeeds in this feat thanks mainly to this cartouche he decrypts as Ramiseum, meaning begotten by Ra, the sun god, designating the great Ramses II. 6 years later, in 1828, Champollion fulfills his lifelong dream to tread on the soil of Egypt, and he writes,
I kissed the Egyptian soil, touching it for the first time, after having so long desired it. I am filled with confidence in the results of our journey. I will spare no effort to succeed.
Throughout his expedition that will last 18 months, from Alexandria to the Temple of Abu Simbel, the fate of the greatest Egyptologist will constantly cross paths with the most illustrious pharaohs of ancient Egypt. With Ramses II, Champollion indeed discovers the pharaoh of abundance. A 70-year reign. 11 wives, 200 concubines. A pharaoh, warlord, and builder, who 1,000 years after the pyramids, crossed the country with temples of incredible beauty. A sovereign who even in death explodes. He dies at the age of 91, which is totally unheard of at the time. "200 years after the decrypting of hieroglyphics, a new feat is about to be undertaken. Thanks to the pharaoh's mummy, a team of Egyptian doctors and English forensic specialists will try to reconstruct his face from the past. Soon, they will be able to plunge their eyes into those of the mythical pharaoh and continue the great Egyptian adventure initiated by Jean-François Champollion.
I think Champollion would have been delighted to see the face of Ramses II. He was such an important and significant character that the idea of being able to see what he looked like would have been like the perfect end to his story.
On December 26, 1828, Champollion docks at Abu Simbel in ancient Nubia in the south of Egypt. That is where the most remarkable encounter will take place between the discoverer of hieroglyphics and the great pharaoh. A veritable shock for Champollion.
Abu Simbel alone is worth the trip to Nubia. It's a marvel, a setting worthy of admiration.
At Abu Simbel, Champollion discovers a first facet of Ramses II, a builder king who left an exceptional heritage to posterity. This masterpiece still fascinates archaeologists worldwide today.
This temple is magnificent. There's something majestic about it. It's a marvel. You can look at photos of it, but you really need to come here to admire the dimensions, the hugeness of this temple. And just imagine, when Champollion arrived in 1828, a sand flow coming from the plateau prevented him from getting into the temple easily. Champollion managed. He paid some workers to clear the top of the entrance door and slipped inside. It was a real furnace, more than 40 degrees, so he complained about the heat, but it so pleased him about what he discovers inside that tiredness doesn't get to him, and he spends several days inside copying out the texts.
A constant and abundant stream of sweat running down his body and eyes drips onto the paper that is already soaked by the humid heat of this atmosphere, overheated like an autoclave.
What makes Abu Simbel so particular can be found mainly in its building technique. Because this temple is a speos, in other words, a building dug directly in the mountain.
Imagine that you have a mountain here, and that with patience and strikes of the pickaxe, all the stones were cleared to leave only the useful things, namely the walls and the pillars to support the ceiling. But no blocks of stone were brought here. Everything you see was obtained by rock extraction to clear the spaces, and then the pillars and statues were worked on to obtain the shape they have today.
So everything had to be excavated and aligned with no room for error. For the pharaoh had demanded that the naos of the temple, the most sacred part, be oriented so that the rising sun lit up its deified representation and the gods surrounding it. A phenomenon that was only supposed to take place twice a year, the day of his ascent to the throne and the day he was born. Champollion is amazed by this enormous space carved into the heart of the mountain. But what really surprises him is the study of the decor that Ramses II put so much care into.
I regret not having a genie's lamp to transport them to the middle of the Place Louis XV in order to convince in one go the critics of Egyptian art.
Egyptologist and art historian Hurig Suruzian regularly comes to document this temple, the most accomplished, according to her, of the reign of Ramses II. There's a dynamic here, as much in the royal representations, which are full of dignity, strength, and power, as in the movements and bas-reliefs. Everything is in movement. Everything is very lively. I think it's magnificent. And here, there's a momentum. The galloping horses are jumping. It's extraordinary. It's a temple where the builder king was still very young, full of energy and dynamic, and we can see that transposed in the reliefs that are so full of life. It's fabulous. For Champollion, Egyptian art reaches a sort of peak here, and will not be equaled until centuries later with the Greek and Roman civilizations. The convention was to have characters portrayed in profile, as you can see in the bas-reliefs. They invented a form of representation that they really sublimated and repeated, it's true, but with variations and a pronounced taste for the aesthetic impact. So here the queen is represented standing. She advances, carrying her offerings to the goddess. Her elongated, almond-shaped eyes, surrounded by stripes of makeup, and her mouth and corners of her lips fleshy. That is typically Egyptian. We don't find that in other cultures. They were great artists, trained since their childhood and from generations before. And the care given to these representations is all the more important when it's a question of the pharaoh's image. Ramses II is going to order more statues and more colossi than any other pharaoh. More than 300 of these masterpieces still stand.
So you need some distance to admire these things.
Yes. It's such a rare opportunity with this light. I adore these statues. I love them because the sculpture is so well executed in respecting the rules and conventions. But there is also the personality of the king himself in it too. The face is rather oval, the eyes slightly turned towards the inside. The bridge of the nose here is a bit thick, whereas in other portraits, his nose is a little hooked, which isn't the case here. But we recognize the mouth straight away with its shaped lips and the pierced ears. The ears are always pierced.
With your smile, we might think that you're almost in love with him.
No, if it was a question of falling in love, I think it would have been Amenhotep III, who was far more handsome. Ramesses II also appeared to be deeply in love. In any case, that's what this site indicates. For Abu Simbel is in fact two temples. The first one is dedicated to Ramesses, as well as to the god Amun. The second is erected in tribute to Nefertari, the pharaoh's favorite wife, and to the goddess Hathor. Only two queens have had this privilege in the entire history of ancient Egypt.
For a king to dedicate a whole temple to his wife, he must have truly loved her a lot.
On the facade of his temple, the queen is sculpted in the same proportions as the pharaoh. Here, Ramesses makes Nefertari his equal, a sovereign and a goddess.
And these two temples allow us to understand how the world functions, according to the Egyptians. The world functions thanks to a main god, the sun god. The sun god is brought to creation, being inspired, it was said, by his wife, the goddess Hathor. And so the king and the queen, Ramses and Nefertari, embodied in a way the originating couple that enabled the creation of the world, the preservation of the world, and the development of ancient Egypt.
This encounter at Abu Simbel is the apotheosis of Champollion's journey. But this great Egyptian adventure began a few months earlier. On August 18, 1828, Champollion set foot for the first time in Egypt. And after exploring Cairo and Memphis, he begins his journey up the Nile. He adopts from then on the local style, with a long dark beard and Turkish turban. Feverish and excited, he has only one aim: to reach mythical Thebes.
It was on the morning of November 20th that the wind, tired of disturbing us for 2 whole days and closing the entrance of the sanctuary to us, allowed me to finally approach Thebes.
The Egyptologist goes first to the left bank of the Nile, where an immense monument is found, the Ramiseum. Here he discovers another personality trait of Ramesses II, that of a great head of state. Christian Leblanc has been digging here for 30 years with the same enthusiasm as his illustrious predecessor.
It's always an immense joy seeing the sun light up this monument every morning. I must pay a justified tribute by saying that the Ramiseum is the noblest and purest thing in Thebes. Champollion arrived in this monument, seeing the name of Ramses engraved everywhere on the columns, pillars, and walls. He saw the monument of Ramses there, which became the Ramiseum.
In the mind of Champollion, this monument can indeed only be dedicated to a great pharaoh. In one of the courtyards, this colossus, in pieces, leaves no room for doubt.
It was a colossus that measured almost 18 meters high and weighed about 1,000 tons, that represented Ramses II seated and facing eastwards.
Christian Leblanc's team carried out the stone blocking and managed to put the colossus back together virtually. It is the biggest statue ever sculpted in ancient Egypt.
What's interesting to see is that here we find ourselves today in front of a block, a statue in stone, and that at the time, for the ancient Egyptians, this statue was alive. From the moment the colors were present, the image lived, the image was alive.
Champollion understands that this image was adored by the visitors who came to see it, just like a pharaoh is adored but also a god. Because the Ramiseum that Christian Leblanc's excavations allowed to reconstitute was at once an economic, administrative, and religious center. In the center of the building, there was a temple, richly decorated and dedicated to the worship of Ramesses. In the naos, there was a deified representation of the pharaoh in gold, placed on a sacred gondola for worship. But the Ramiseum was also an economic hub, bustling with multiple warehouses where merchandise transited before being redistributed. There were also kitchens, bakeries, breweries, and a whole administration that managed the ensemble.
What we have here is a prefiguration of the modern state. Egypt was going to live in a prosperous age. We have no trace during this era of the slightest revolt of the population towards the king. This will happen much later, however. So the reign of Ramses II is a very beautiful one.
By creating the foundations of an administered state, Ramses II reinforced the aura that made him go down in history. But half man, half god, the impact of his colossus on the spirits ended up creating fear.
During the Christian era, this image will be destroyed because it's believed to be endowed with a power since it's alive. It has a power, or even powers, that may be benign or malign. So it had to be destroyed. But what was being attacked? The face was attacked, the hands and the foot. In fact, it was all the active parts of the image that were destroyed.
At the time of Champollion, the pharaoh was therefore already disfigured. He showed concern.
You have to admire both the strength of the people who erected this marvelous colossus and that of the barbarians who mutilated it with so much skill.
But today, thanks to new technology, an international scientific team is going to take revenge on history. In Cairo, the grand project of reconstructing the face of Ramesses is about to begin. The radiologist Sahar Salim and the famous Egyptologists Zahi Hawass are going to base their conclusions on the study of exceptional remains. The mummy of the pharaoh, discovered a few years after Champollion's journey to Egypt, which he probably would have loved to admire. It arrived at the Museum of Cairo in an incredible manner.
There was in that time actually a custom. The inspector of the custom refused the mummies to enter Cairo. Then his boss said, why? He said, because there is no word mummy written in the custom books. He told him, you are stupid. Look, there is a word here called salted fish. Then all the mummies entered Cairo as salted fish.
Today, this mummy holds the clues that are going to be vital for the scientists. Notably, the shape of his nose.
You can see the zygoma and the special features of the nose. The embalmers preserve this unique hooked appearance of the nose. If you go and see the other kings, they will see that their nose is actually smashed from the effect of the wrappings. But here, the embalmers, they placed a bone of a small animal inside. And this is the pride of the king, having his nose. All the mummification of the king Ramses the Great was really unique.
But this mummy isn't enough to scientifically reconstruct the physiognomy of the pharaoh. Zahar Salim must enter the heart of the remains without impairing anything. For that, she uses an advanced technique which allows her to pierce the secret of the mummies, like today with this embalmed child, still in its sarcophagus. Zahar is going to use a scanner, like those used in hospitals. In 30 minutes or so, the scanner will carry out transversal sections to the nearest millimeter, with no risk to the mummy.
تاخدي من أول الكوفن تاخدي كله على بعضه 1.25 تعرفي كده عشان نعمل reconstruction لهم كله. A mummy, it's like a time capsule. You can tell people from thousands of years how they looked like, what the diseases they had, what kind of food they eat, and all this can be, the story can be told from the CT scan.
A few months ago, Zahar was able to scan the most prestigious mummy of Egypt, that of Ramses II. This is the scan of its skull, the crucial element for facial reconstruction. Reconstructing the face of a pharaoh is a worldwide event, so Zahar called upon one of the best legal anthropologists. Some 2,200 miles from here in Liverpool, England. From her laboratory at John Moores University, Caroline Wilkinson collaborates with the British police and the FBI Academy of the United States to identify human skeletons. Champollion knew how to decipher hieroglyphics, whereas Caroline knows how to read skulls.
When you first look at a skull, I guess the things that we're looking for initially are strong characteristic detail that you can see. For example, on Ramesses, he's got very large nasal root, so between the eyes, that bone there is very high and pronounced. So this is the soft nose. So most of your nose is cartilage, but there's bone at the top here between the eyes, and the shape of that bone predicts the shape of the overall nose.
By studying each detail of the skull, Caroline is also going to be able to reposition the facial muscles.
So the stronger a muscle is, where it attaches to the bone, the stronger those attachments will be visible on the surface. So look here on the chin, you can see these lines. That's where the muscles of the chin attach, and it leaves a mark on the bone, and you can see that. So I don't decide, it's anatomy decides.
Long weeks of work await Caroline before the face of the pharaoh resurges from the past. A sovereign whose character Champollion is going to slowly decipher. Soon it will be the shrewd politician and Ramesses II that he discovers. On November 23, 1828, in Thebes, he explores the right bank of the Nile, as it is a crucial part of his expedition. Some call it the Jerusalem of the pharaohs.
This name was already well in my thoughts. It had become so strong since visiting the ruins of the old capital, the oldest of all the cities in the world. For 4 whole days, I ran from marvel to marvel.
Today, the city is called Luxor and is still a must for all of Champollion's heirs. Like Claude Opsimer, the archaeologists met in Abu Simbel.
Here we are, and with a bit of luck, the goddess Sechat will be illuminated. And yes, here she is. When Champollion arrived in Luxor, he was the first person able to read the hieroglyphs on the walls. Thanks to his knowledge of Copt, which is the final stage of the Egyptian language, he could understand certain words and sentences, and the gist of what the Egyptians were inscribing here.
By deciphering these hieroglyphics, Champollion is going to realize that the great Ramises was also a master of propaganda. From the moment of his ascension to the throne in 1279 BC, he marked this highly symbolic place with his seal. Indeed, according to Egyptian tradition, Thebes represented the emergence of the world, as these papyrus-shaped columns bear witness to.
The columns you can see here are papyriform columns. This alludes to the papyrus of the Egyptian marshes in the north. It also alludes to primordial times when nothing existed, apart from the primordial ocean. And one fine day, a lotus emerged, opened, and let the sun break through. So here you have the lotuses that emerge and let the sun break through. And Ramses II took advantage and inscribed his name, as the king is the incarnation of the sun god on earth.
Ramses II had this cartouche engraved all over the walls of the Luxor temple. For Champollion, this is proof of the sovereign's power. Specialists today also interpret this as the premise of skillful political communication. At the entrance of the temple, Champollion deciphers an enormous bas-relief. It relates the Battle of Kadesh. Ramses II stages a striking victory there. But what Champollion doesn't know, and what his successors are going to discover, is that in reality, the king manipulated the facts linked to his glory. At the time, a great power led by the Hittites was threatening the north of Egypt. They occupied central Anatolia, Asia Minor, and what is now known as Syria. The Egyptians and the Hittites coveted two territories, Amurru on the Mediterranean and the city of Kadesh, a strategic site at the crossroads of several commercial routes. When Ramses II took to the throne, Kadesh was in the hands of the Hittites, but he will do all he can to conquer it.
Setting up a good border in the north was going to help secure the Egyptian empire, and one of the king's roles was to ensure the security and equilibrium of Egypt, and that took place by re-establishing and maintaining borders.
In 1274 BC, the young king therefore decides to launch a campaign with his army. Near the city of Kadesh, two Bedouins inform the Egyptians that the enemy is still less than 100 miles to the north. So Ramses II calmly sets up camp. But these Bedouins are in fact spies who have deceived him. After a good beating, they tell the truth. The Hittites are in fact very close. And they soon start attacking. It is a complete fiasco for the Egyptian camp.
During all this, Ramses gets into his chariot, represented on the other side of the pylon. He climbs into his chariot, and the texts say, "I was alone without my army." Yes, he was alone, but he was with his entire escort.
And not any old escort. The Shamsu and the Narines were elite troops that managed to defeat the enemy in the shadow of the pharaoh. After the battle, the Egyptians count the prisoners and the severed hands of the killed enemies.
Though the Battle of Kadesh that day was a stunning victory for Ramses II, he still hadn't in fact reached his goal, that of taking over the city. So this campaign was a failure. He went back to Egypt, and the Hittites progressed towards the south and captured territories in the south of Kadesh, in the Bekaa Valley. It was therefore a victory for the Hittites in the end. Back in Egypt, Ramses II, in his role of clever politician, obviously doesn't explain all the details. Instead, he emphasizes his outstanding and personal victory on the day of the battle and says nothing about what happened afterwards.
Champollion is impressed by the almighty power of the pharaoh, but this is nothing compared to what he is going to discover a few miles from here. On November 24, 1828, he goes into the Temple of Karnak.
There before me was all the magnificence of the pharaohs, the best that mankind has ever imagined and constructed.
And what Champollion sees before him is quite simply the biggest temple of ancient Egypt, with notably this immense room, previously covered. It has 134 majestic columns, each almost 66 feet high.
When Champollion arrived, he was really astonished by the enormous size of these rooms compared to what was being built during his time in Europe. It was an emotional shock for him, even though the large pillared room of Karnak was in fact the same width as Notre Dame of Paris.
This marvel wasn't built by Ramses II, but by his father, the pharaoh Seti I. On his ascension to the throne, the young Ramesses added a sumptuous decor. It's the decor, after all, that astounded and marked the spirit.
Ramses II inherited this building fibre and intrepidness from his father and pursued the work the latter had started. Obviously, it was also to leave the image of who he was to posterity by engraving his names and images. Of course, temples are made of stone and so are destined to be eternal.
3,300 years after his reign, the pharaoh's dream of eternity will soon come true. In Liverpool, he is about to come back to life in the laboratory.
So we can continue to check out the relationship between the soft tissues and the skull as well.
Make sure that we're getting these creases right.
Down here. Yeah. So we make sure we add those in.
Thanks to the scan of Ramesses' mummy, a new stage is being reached.
And double check. But we're making sure that everything is following the reconstruction.
Yeah.
And there's been no distortion as we're sculpting.
We've produced the reconstruction from the skull to the shape of the face, and Mark is now adding 3D textures. So not colour, but shape textures like wrinkles and skin pores and lumps on the skin, but is not information that we get from the skull. So this is the kind of interpretative part that's based around age representation.
So a lot of what we're seeing here on the sculpted face, we know from the musculature. So we know how certain muscles act, so they can kind of contract, they close. Especially the ones here on the forehead, we know the muscle fibers run vertically. So when you kind of frown or you pull your face down, that's going to crease the skin horizontally rather than vertically. So it's more that relationship between the skull, the muscles, and the remaining soft tissues. And that means we can then kind of predict like these crease and fold patterns for the wrinkles, not only here in the forehead, but around the eyes, around the mouth, as well as those age-related creases where we know things are going to sag and pull with gravity. So now we're at the stage that we're happy with the shape of the face, we're happy with those age-related textures, those creases, those sculpted textures. Now we can start to paint the face.
But before starting this stage, Caroline must exchange with Sahar, the radiologist from Cairo.
Hi, Sahar.
Hi, how are you?
We're getting there, we're coming along. Thanks for the data. Have you got some information for us in relation to appearance? Is there any research that's been done on skin colour of ancient Egyptians?
They consider themselves brown color, and it is not like the Libyan, which have whiter color or fair color, or like the African people who had very dark black color. I would choose this tone for the skin of the king. I won't go wrong by choosing this. So I think that this color would be good, and I think also this would fit the king.
Thanks, Sahar. Nice to speak to you, and thanks for the PowerPoint.
Soon, Ramesses is going to get his complexion and hair back. And thanks to the software used in criminal investigations, Caroline hopes to achieve something that would no doubt have amazed Champollion, rejuvenating the pharaoh. For the French Egyptologist, the importance of this sovereign is constantly being confirmed during his voyage. A powerful pharaoh in life, who he will discover grandiose in death. In spring 1829, he enters the Valley of the Kings. 3,500 years ago, the pharaohs of the new empire set up their necropolis there.
It was a stay marked by death. There wasn't a blade of grass, nor a living being, except for the wolves and hyenas that devoured the donkey my servant was riding.
Here, he made a new appointment with the great Ramesses, in his tomb, today closed to the public. The person that holds the key is the famous Egyptologist Zahi Hawass, a star in Egypt with whom tourists have their photo taken.
Thank you very much. Finally, you're more famous than Ramses II, no?
No, Ramses II is the one who made me famous.
Thank you.
Today, exceptionally, he is going to allow us to put ourselves in Champollion's shoes. When the French Egyptologist stepped inside, he was surprised. For only the texts located at the entrance of the sepulchre are accessible to him.
I had an overriding desire to find the tomb of the famous Ramses family, but the sepulchre of this great man seemed to have been on the receiving end of either devastation by barbaric hands or flooded right up to the ceiling by accidental storms.
It was very important for Champollion to come and visit this tomb, and maybe he stayed a long time, and people thought that maybe he slipped inside this tomb. But at least we can imagine the magic of a great man like Champollion to come to the Valley of the Kings and enter inside the tomb of Ramses II.
Zahi Hawass is in charge of restoring this monument, and the building site is gigantic. because the tomb of Ramesses is one of the largest in the necropolis, 551 feet long. At the end of this tunnel, the burial chamber can be found.
This is a burial chamber that contained the great sarcophagus of Ramses II and the mummy. And the mummy was moved on Dynasty 21st and Dynasty 22nd by the priestess, who really saved all the mummies of the kings of the new kingdom. And they put them in two cachettes, one at Deir al-Bahri that was found in 1881, and the second one inside the tomb of Amenhotep II, found in 1902. Can you imagine what kind of treasures that the tomb of Ramses II could be? Look at the tomb of Tutankhamun, a small tomb. It has the size only of this chamber, but contained 5,398 objects. Can you imagine how much this tomb contained of treasures? Countless, because the reign of Ramses II is the golden age of Egypt.
Hard to imagine today the magnificence of the sepulchre. To get an idea, a visit not so far from here would be useful, to the Valley of the Queens. It is here that Nefertari's tomb can be found, the favorite wife of Ramses II, who died 43 years before him. Christian Leblanc knows this place well, as he has often done digs here. But Champollion didn't get the chance to visit this marvel. It was discovered in 1904, after his expedition.
Here, we are in what was the abode of eternity of Queen Nefertari. I worked for more than 20 years in the Valley of the Queens, and this tomb is very dear to me, and above all, Nefertari, as I had the opportunity to study this queen closely in the course of my research. You could say it's someone I feel I know well, like a relative.
It must be said that Nefertari had everything to charm with her predestined name that meant the most beautiful of all. For Ramesses, Nefertari wasn't a choice. She was imposed on him by his father. But it was love at first sight. He never stopped paying homage to this woman all his life.
Ramses II had at least 11 official wives. I say official, but in any case, Nefertari was certainly his favorite and for whom he had a lot of love. And I think that this tomb is the illustration of that. When you see how it has been decorated so magnificently, it bears witness to the love Ramses II really felt for his beloved wife.
For Ramesses II, the construction of this tomb establishes itself as a priority building site, so it was entrusted to the best artists of the kingdom.
As you can see, she is adorned with a very beautiful necklace, earrings, and is clearly wearing a dress of highly transparent linen with very full sleeves. What's quite extraordinary is that the artists managed so well to convey the transparency of the fabric because under the dress, we can see the body of Nefertari that has been given a rosy finish. And it's quite incredible to see that the artists were able to reproduce the transparency of a fabric. It's important to know that all the colors are the original ones. They are the colors of the time when all scenes were represented by artisans. It's exceptional.
When this tomb was sealed at the death of Nefertari in 1256 BC, Ramses II was devastated. He dedicated this poem to her.
My beloved is unique, and no one can equal her. Dying, she stole my heart.
The tomb then endures thousands of years and miraculously comes back to us almost intact, except for one detail. The queen's mummy remains unfound.
When we studied the Valley of the Queens, I realized that none of the queen's mummies had been found, which led me to imagine that hypothetically, there's still a hideaway that we haven't yet found, and in which we will probably find not only the remains of Nefertari, but also those of other queens, princes, and princesses who had been buried in this necropolis. We have no text to indicate where we might find this hideaway, of course. So we must understand that one day, perhaps in generations to come, this legendary hiding place of the queens, once buried in this royal necropolis, will perhaps be found.
Meanwhile, thousands of miles from here, another mummy is about to reveal its final secrets. That of Ramses II. In Liverpool, after several months of hard work, it's the big day for Caroline Wilkinson.
Hi, how are you?
She is at last going to reveal to Sahar, the radiologist from Cairo, the face of the great king.
So I think we're ready to show you the depiction of Ramses.
I can't wait.
Press play.
Elaborated from the scanned skull of his mummy, here is the face of Ramses II, great pharaoh of Egypt, just before his death.
Can you see, Sahar?
Yes, amazing. A very important moment for me to be introduced to the king for the first time ever. It is so real.
It's a big moment for us all.
It brings back history to life. It brings back the greatness of the king, the greatness of the ancient Egyptian civilization back to life.
Caroline has a long experience in the field of facial reconstruction, so she knows how close to reality this is.
We know that about 70% of the surface of the reconstruction will have less than 2 millimeters of error. And with him, because he's very old, and we've seen a lot of those creases and wrinkles on the preserved soft tissues, we can be pretty certain that that's how he looked at that age. He should be recognizable to somebody who knew him at the time when he was alive. There's a few of us.
But Caroline still has a surprise for Sahar.
So we also wanted to try and show him as he looked in his prime. So we did what's called an age regression. Would you be interested in that?
Yeah, very much. I'm eager.
Okay.
And here he is, at the height of his reign, at the age of 45.
He was definitely a handsome king, and he is so Egyptian.
You think?
He looks like many faces that I see every day in Cairo and Egypt. Yeah, it is a moment for the whole world to look at the king, the great King Ramses again.
In his wildest dreams, Jean-François Champollion could never have imagined this face-to-face with Ramses II that science has made possible today.
It's really amazing for archaeologists to be able to see people from history. So for Champollion to finally see this pharaoh that he worked around and understood, to see him as a living, breathing person must be mind-blowing for somebody from that period.
After decrypting hieroglyphics, exploring the most beautiful temples of Egypt, and meeting the greatest pharaoh in history, Jean-François Champollion ends his journey and goes back to France exhausted in December 1829. He dies 2 years later at the age of 41 and will himself go down in history.